On my wedding anniversary, my husband gave his secretary jewelry and handed me a 50% off soup coupon. That day, I felt like a piece of me had broken. It wasn't just the gift or lack thereof, but what it represented. Years of silence, of empty gestures, and of a life where I had learned to accept less and less. I looked at that piece of paper and felt that something was about to change, though I didn't yet know how or when. From that moment on, I realized my story would never be the same. What seemed like just another disappointment opened doors to truths I could never have imagined. Every step I took led me to face situations that tested my limits and presented me with difficult choices. The path that followed was full of surprises, challenges, and decisions I never thought I would have to make. And with each day, I discovered that life can turn upside down when we least expect it. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The day began with a strange mix of expectation and resignation. It was our wedding anniversary, and I had already learned not to expect grand gestures from Mark. Still, a part of me insisted on believing that this time he might surprise me. When he walked through the door with a white envelope in his hands, my heart beat faster. I sat on the couch watching him approach, trying to read any sign on his face. He handed me the envelope without a smile, like someone carrying out a formality. My fingers slid across the paper until I found its contents. A 50% off soup coupon. The silence between us was more deafening than any argument. I forced a smile, swallowed the bitter taste of disappointment, and thanked him. He just nodded, picked up his phone, and dove into his messages as if I weren't there. The rest of the day dragged on. I prepared dinner, set the table, and he ate without saying a word about the occasion. As I washed the dishes, I looked at the coupon on the counter, that piece of paper that suddenly seemed to weigh a ton. I knew it wasn't about the soup. It was about what it represented. Neglect, indifference, emotional abandonment. When I went to bed that night, the coupon was still on my nightstand, like an uncomfortable reminder. Something inside me began to crack, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to glue the pieces back together. It was then that a message flashed on his phone screen, and my breath caught in my chest. That night, I discovered something that made me choke on my own pain. The message had no saved name, just a number. I opened it slowly, like someone afraid to confirm a premonition. The words were brief but loaded with meaning. "Thank you for the necklace, it's perfect. I can't wait to wear it tomorrow." My stomach turned. It wasn't for me. It had never been for me. Her name didn't appear, but I knew who she was. Lauren Hayes, the perfect secretary. Always with a rehearsed smile and impeccable high heels. I remembered the times Mark had come home late, claiming endless meetings. Suddenly, everything fit together with cruel clarity. While I was collecting coupons and saving on groceries, she was receiving jewelry. Rubies, to be exact. The next day, we went to an expensive restaurant, his choice whenever he wanted to show something off to someone, but never for me. I sat at the table, observing the luxurious atmosphere, and thought about the necklace Lauren was probably wearing at that moment. My throat burned, but I smiled, playing the role of the exemplary wife. When Mark got up to take a call, I went to the restroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. There was exhaustion, sadness, and a pang of shame for having accepted so little for so long. The tears came silently, but they were heavy. And in the restaurant restroom alone, I cried over the cold sink. A few days later, while organizing papers in the home office, I found a forgotten bank statement on the desk. It was from an account I didn't know existed. My eyes scanned the transactions, and the name of a well-known jewelry store jumped out at me. The amount was high, enough to confirm everything I had feared. I kept reading, and more dates lined up with excuses he had given me in the past. Expensive meals, discreet hotels, luxurious gifts. The numbers told a story he would never admit in words. I felt my body go cold, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. It wasn't just betrayal, it was planned. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control the nausea. Part of me wanted to tear up that paper and pretend I had never seen it. But another part, more awakened, knew that the statement was a key, and keys open doors, including those that hide truths. I knelt on the floor, taking a deep breath, and realized I was facing something bigger than a failed relationship. This had deep roots that I would need the courage to dig up. I didn't know what I would find yet, but I had a feeling it would be painful. And there it was, the first thread that would unravel the entire fabric of our story. The following days were filled with calculated silence. Mark continued his routine as if nothing had happened, while I stored every detail in my memory. The bank statement I found wouldn't leave my mind. I needed to understand more, and to do that I had to act carefully. I couldn't alert him that I knew. I started paying attention to his every move. I noted times, mentioned locations, and even the tone of his text alerts. One night I waited for him to fall asleep, and with a racing heart, I searched the document folder in the closet. There was another statement, this time more recent. The account wasn't just for sporadic expenses. It had regular deposits from sources I didn't recognize. Something was wrong, very wrong. It wasn't just an affair. There was money that didn't belong to him. And if it didn't belong to him, where was it coming from? My fear began to mix with a new feeling. Determination. Still, I didn't know where to start. Alone, it was easy to get lost in my own assumptions. That's when I thought of Carla. She always had a keen sense for lies and wasn't afraid to speak hard truths. I took a deep breath and decided to call her. But Carla, my friend, told me something that would change everything. Carla answered with her usual firm voice, and I broke down. I told her about the coupon, the ruby necklace, the bank statement, and the mysterious account. She listened in silence, interrupting only to ask pointed questions. When I finished, a weight had lifted from my shoulders, as if sharing was the first step out of the labyrinth. She wasn't surprised. She said she had always been suspicious of Mark's behavior, but never wanted to interfere without proof. Now, according to her, I had more than suspicions, I had a trail. Carla suggested I make copies of everything and keep them in a safe place away from the house. I knew she was right. Deep down, hearing her voice reminded me of who I was before I got lost in this marriage. I had been strong, I had faced difficulties alone, but years of indifference had turned me into a shadow of myself. Carla seemed to want to reignite that version of me. I promised her I would start protecting myself, and not just emotionally. I needed to think strategically like him. Carla offered to help me investigate the origin of the deposits. That conversation planted something inside me. Courage. And the more I talked, the more I remembered the woman I used to be. In the following days, Carla and I began to assemble a silent puzzle. She managed to access information I never could have on my own. Using old contacts who worked in banks and offices, we discovered that Mark's account was linked to a shell company, registered in someone else's name. This wasn't just an extramarital affair. It was something that could have serious legal implications. Each new discovery made it clear that he wasn't just cold or indifferent. He was calculating. And calculating men rarely leave loose ends, unless they believe no one would dare to pull them. While he believed I remained passive, I was already keeping evidence in a locked box at Carla's house. I started observing more, speaking less, and writing everything down. Every night, lying next to him, I no longer saw the man I had loved, but the adversary I would have to face. It wasn't time for a confrontation, not yet. But the certainty grew. To survive this, I would have to think a few steps ahead. And this time I wouldn't back down. But if he had a plan, I would start creating my own. Carla and I established an almost clandestine rhythm for our investigation. We met in discreet cafes or at her house, far from Mark's watchful eyes. She brought reports, names, and connections I would have never imagined. It was like opening an old dusty box that held dangerous secrets. I followed the trails Carla presented to me. We discovered recurring payments for services that didn't actually exist, as well as reservations at hotels frequently used by executives during business trips. Each line of information seemed to illuminate a dark corner of Mark's life. Times I found myself wanting to stop. The truth carried an unbearable weight, and there were days when I wished I could return to comfortable ignorance. But something inside me knew there was no turning back. I had already seen too much, and with each step, I understood that my life was about to change forever. What frightened me most wasn't the marital betrayal, but the shadowy world that seemed to surround Mark. People and companies connected in suspicious ways, as if he were involved in something much bigger than I imagined. It was like following a thread that seemed to have no end. Every discovery hurt as if it were tearing a piece of me away. Carla insisted that I seek professional help, not just to understand what was happening, but to take care of my mind. That's how I met Dr. Alan Bishop. In our first meeting, I told him about the coupon, the necklace, the secret account, and my most recent discoveries. He listened to me with rare attention without interrupting, and only at the end did he ask, "And you, where do you fit into this story?" The question caught me by surprise. I realized I had been so focused on Mark and his actions that I had forgotten to look at myself. The following sessions became a space where I could bare my soul without fear. There I cried for the woman who had faded, for the life I had accepted without question, and for the pain of realizing I had been complicit in my own silence. He didn't judge me. He simply guided me to find answers within myself. Slowly, I began to see that this investigation wasn't just about Mark. It was about me. About reclaiming my story, which had been written by other hands for years. And that realization strangely began to give me strength back. Dr. Bishop looked at me like someone watching a person get up from the floor. On a rainy afternoon, Evelyn, my mother-in-law, showed up unannounced. She entered with her usual imposing air, carrying a tea tray and a look that mixed curiosity and judgment. She said she was worried about my tired expression and wanted to know if anything was wrong. I sat with her, controlling every word. Evelyn had a peculiar talent for gathering information without seeming like she was investigating. She spoke sweetly, but each sentence was laden with subtle insinuations, as if she were trying to gauge how much I knew about her son. As she stirred the sugar in her cup, she made vague comments about women who don't take good care of their marriages, and men who get distracted when they aren't valued. It was a game of mirrors. She seemed to be defending Mark while simultaneously probing my reactions. I didn't give direct answers, but I noticed something in her eyes, a restless glint, as if she knew more than she was letting on. Perhaps Evelyn wasn't just there to talk, but to assess the situation. Her presence reignited the feeling that this story had even deeper layers. She brought tea, but there was poison between the lines. Days after her unexpected visit, Evelyn called me for a meeting at the most refined cafe in town. I accepted, though my instinct screamed at me to refuse. She arrived on time with a serene smile and a handbag that looked like it cost more than my car. She ordered 2 cappuccinos and, without beating around the bush, said she wanted to help resolve the situation with Mark. I remained silent, waiting for her to reveal what she knew. Evelyn spoke as if she were on my side, using kind words but always letting slip subtle comments that downplayed her son's actions. "Men have their phases. Sometimes they need to feel admired," she said, stirring her spoon in the coffee. She suggested that I not confront Mark immediately, that it would be smarter to let things play out while she took care of calming her son. The advice sounded more like a way to buy time than a real strategy to help me. I knew her well enough to know her game wasn't simple. When she said goodbye, Evelyn hugged me tightly, as if sealing a silent pact. But I left that cafe with the feeling that I was being watched and measured. Her supposed help sounded more like a test. Her sweet tone hit sharp barbs. The following week, Evelyn showed up again, this time at my house. She brought a cake and an expression that mixed concern and compassion. We sat at the table, and without me asking, she began to speak. She said she had known about Mark's affair with Lauren for some time, and had never approved. For a moment, I felt she was truly taking my side. But the way she recounted the facts made me uncomfortable. She claimed the fault was entirely Lauren's, a woman who took advantage of Mark's naivety. It was a convenient narrative, clearing his name and shifting all the responsibility. As I listened, I realized that this confession was not driven by sincerity, but by strategy. Evelyn seemed to want to keep me close, perhaps to control what I knew and prevent me from acting against her son. Her partial honesty was an invitation for me to let my guard down. While she spoke, my gaze was fixed on the teacup in front of me. I knew I was facing someone who wasn't showing all her cards, but who played them skillfully. She knew the weight of words, and how to use them to shape decisions. It was the truth. And yet it was a trap. A few days later, Evelyn invited me to accompany her to a jewelry store. She said she wanted to buy something special for me, as proof that she was on my side. I hesitated but accepted. Part of me wanted to see how far she would go with this game. At the store, she tried on rings and necklaces with the ease of someone who had been there many times before. Among the display cases, I recognized a design identical to the one I saw in Lauren's message. My heart sped up. Evelyn noticed my gaze and with a slight smile, commented that some pieces have complicated stories. It became clear that she knew more about Mark's purchases than she admitted. Perhaps she had helped him choose the gift for Lauren, or at least had known about it. And yet, there she was, offering me a necklace as if she could wipe away the filth with sparkle. I left the store with the jewelry in my purse and a weight on my chest. That gift wasn't affection. It was a bargaining chip. Evelyn wasn't just a spectator in the story. She had an active role in it. Even though she was his mother, she was also in on the game. That afternoon Carla called, saying she needed to see me urgently. We sat in her kitchen, and she placed a manila folder on the table. Inside were copies of corporate documents that, she said, were linked to Mark. There were contracts, invoices, and payment receipts. What caught my attention most was that many of these papers had dates that coincided with periods when Mark claimed to be on strategic trips. But, upon closer inspection, I realized the contracts were fictitious, with companies that didn't even exist. He was using intermediaries to move large sums of money. With each page, my disbelief grew. It wasn't just emotional or marital betrayal. There were clear signs of fraud. I thought about the consequences not just for him but for me. If the family name came up in these transactions, I could be dragged down with him. Carla insisted that I keep secure copies and start preparing a file. For the first time, I felt we were moving from being mere observers to building a case. But the fear of a misstep was constant. The dates didn't add up, but the betrayal did. A few days later, I ran into Lauren by chance in the lobby of a corporate building. She seemed nervous, looking around as if she were afraid of being seen with me. Still, she invited me for a quick coffee. I didn't understand why, but I accepted. There was something different about her posture. We sat down, and before she even ordered, she said that things with Mark were strange. She told me he had canceled 2 meetings without explanation and had been more distant. Her tone of voice wasn't that of a woman in love, but of someone beginning to feel suspicious. As she spoke, I realized Lauren didn't know everything. Perhaps she believed their relationship was his priority, but the shadows in her eyes said otherwise. She was starting to get a bitter taste of being discarded. I didn't reveal anything I knew, but I asked subtle questions, trying to understand how much she suspected. Lauren was restless, as if she sensed something bigger was happening behind the scenes. And for the first time, she didn't look at me with superiority. She was beginning to understand that she was also just a piece in the game. During one sleepless night, I sat at the computer and, driven by an impulse, accessed the shared email account we still use for household matters. I didn't expect to find anything, but there was a hidden folder. My heart raced as I clicked on it. There was an exchange of messages between Mark and a private attorney. I read each line with growing attention. He spoke of initiating a divorce process cleanly, to preserve his public image. But the cruelest detail was in the plan. He intended to build a narrative where I would appear unstable and emotionally unbalanced, thereby justifying the separation. It was meticulous as always. Even the assets were listed to be protected from me. He had already started moving funds and preparing documents to ensure I would leave with empty hands. This wasn't just coldness, it was a direct attack on my dignity. I closed the email with trembling hands. It was no longer a matter of protecting myself emotionally. Now it was about survival. And the only way out would be to fight with every weapon I had. He planned everything, even the destruction of my reputation. That night, Carla told me that Mark had an important meeting at the main office and that, coincidentally, Lauren would also be in the building. The information piqued my curiosity, and I decided to go there, not to be seen but to observe from a distance. The lobby was quiet, lit only by the reflection from the polished glass lights. I saw Lauren sitting in the reception area, restless, her fingers drumming on the arm of the chair. When the receptionist called her, she went through a side door, and I followed a few steps behind. I stopped at the partially open door and heard her voice, thick with tension. "You've been avoiding me, Mark. What's going on?" she asked, with a mix of frustration and vulnerability. He replied with rehearsed coldness, saying he was swamped with work. But his dry tone betrayed his impatience. Lauren didn't back down. She mentioned hearing comments about other people in his life and directly asked if there was something he was hiding. The reaction was instant. He leaned forward, crossed his arms, and said she had no right to meddle in his affairs. His voice was now low but sharp. The air grew thick, almost suffocating. Lauren retreated physically, but not in her expression. Her eyes revealed that something inside her had changed. I could feel, even from a distance, the exact moment her trust began to crumble. His mask fell. Right in front of her. 2 days later, I was surprised by a message from Lauren asking to meet. We arranged to meet in an underground parking garage, far from familiar eyes. When she appeared, I noticed her posture had changed. Her slumped shoulders, restless gaze, and hesitant voice indicated that something was about to collapse. "I think you know things about Mark that I don't," she said, looking around as if she feared being followed. I remained silent, just nodding for her to continue. She confessed that he had been canceling dates, avoiding conversations, and now seemed more concerned with the racing tracks than keeping her close. Lauren spoke in an almost confessional tone, admitting she was beginning to feel she had never been a priority for him. "I think I'm realizing I'm no different from you," she murmured, lowering her eyes. For the first time, the distance between us seemed smaller. I didn't offer direct confirmations, but I asked questions that led her to reflect. Her face betrayed regret, perhaps not for me, but for her own naivety. There was something new in her eyes, a shadow of guilt that wasn't there before. She looked at me with guilt for the first time. In the following weeks, Mark's behavior changed. He avoided direct confrontations and came home later and later, keeping conversations to a minimum. It was as if he was trying to measure every word, fearing that any slip-up would reveal too much. His displays of power and ostentation diminished. He started avoiding expensive restaurants and lavish trips, opting for discreet engagements. It wasn't remorse, it was self-preservation. Mark was retreating to regroup. Lauren, for her part, began to keep her distance. I don't know if it was by her own choice or his command, but it was clear that something had broken between them. The calls decreased and the meetings became rare, which reinforced my perception that his confidence was shaken. I watched his every move in no hurry to act. I knew that the more he tried to contain the damage, the more room I would have to maneuver at the right moment. The game was no longer his alone. He was beginning to lose control of the narrative. It was a quiet morning when, taking advantage of Mark's absence, I decided to revisit his home office. I already knew every drawer, but that day I noticed a cardboard box in the back of the closet, hidden behind old folders. The layer of dust indicated that no one had touched it in a long time. Upon opening it, I found old contracts, yellowed receipts, and among them a silver flash drive. I connected it to the computer with a racing heart. There were folders named with strange codes, as if they were secret files. Inside, spreadsheets detailed massive transfers to international accounts, linked to companies that, with a few online searches, I discovered were ghosts. The dates and amounts coincided with periods when Mark claimed to be traveling for work. The figures were staggering and, more than that, compromising. Some transactions involved the names of executives and intermediaries, who did not appear in the company's official records. It was as if I had opened the lid of a bottomless pit. The impact was immediate. I already knew that Mark had betrayed my trust as a wife, but here was proof that he was also betraying laws, contracts, and corporate oaths. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was criminal. The spreadsheets told more than words ever could. I took the flash drive to Carla, who, after a quick analysis, insisted I needed legal guidance. That's how I met Sophia Bennett, a lawyer with a firm demeanor, a calculating gaze, and an impeccable reputation in complex cases. In our first meeting, I gave her a summary of everything I had discovered. Sophia listened without interrupting, noting every detail. When I opened the flash drive, she examined the spreadsheets with the patience of someone looking for loose threads. After a few minutes, she looked up and said, "This isn't just evidence for a divorce. This could lead to a criminal trial." She explained that the content indicated corruption, money laundering, and corporate fraud. She warned that Mark might try to destroy evidence or manipulate witnesses if he suspected I had access to this information. She recommended we make encrypted copies and store the originals in a secure location. Her confidence as she spoke and the clarity of her plan gave me a sense of assurance I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, I realized I had someone on my team capable of facing Mark as an equal. Now I had an ally he never expected. Sophia and I established a routine of discrete meetings to analyze each document and outline our plan of action. The spreadsheets were cross-referenced with public records, identifying names and contracts that, once exposed, would have a devastating impact. The goal was clear: build a solid case before Mark realized the threat. Part of the strategy involved securing my financial safety. Sophia arranged to freeze assets in my name and transfer funds to protected accounts. She also contacted forensic experts to validate the authenticity of the files. Meanwhile, Mark remained oblivious, believing he still had control of the narrative. But I was no longer reacting to his moves, I was making my own. The difference between us was that he underestimated my ability to plan. Each meeting with Sophia reminded me that, in the end, justice is not achieved with courage alone, but with preparation. And I was more prepared than ever. This time I would be the one writing the story. For years, even though it was never spoken, there was a silent pact between us. I would maintain appearances and in return, he would guarantee stability and a comfortable life. This tacit agreement worked as long as I accepted the role of a supporting character in my own story. But after I initiated legal action and the financial freezes, Mark realized this balance had been broken. The way he looked at me was no longer one of indifference but of vigilance. One evening he asked to talk. He sat on the sofa, leaned forward, and spoke about resolving everything without a scandal. He tried to turn the situation into a business negotiation, with coldly calculated proposals to preserve his image. I listened without interrupting, as if each word were another piece revealing his true game. When I refused, the air changed. The mask of cordiality fell, and in its place a hard, almost threatening look emerged. There was no more room for disguises. He understood right then that I was not willing to protect the narrative he so cherished. The following days were marked by a tense silence. He avoided long conversations, but his behavior betrayed his unease. He seemed to be measuring every step, as if trying to anticipate my moves. I, on the other hand, no longer feared his reactions. I was ready for any confrontation that might come. The invisible pact that had sustained our marriage for years was broken. And with it, the false security he believed he possessed. His promises melted like ice in the sun. Evelyn always had a watchful eye, capable of noticing changes that others would ignore. After I refused to play Mark's game, she began calling me frequently under trivial pretexts, asking about a recipe, commenting on the weather, reminding me of family dates. But behind the casual conversations there was a pattern, subtle questions carefully placed, seeking to understand how far I had gone. During a lunch at her house, I noticed her observations were sharper. "Mark seems tired lately. Do you know anything?" she said, like someone casting a line and waiting. I didn't answer directly, just turned the question back on her, and the slight tightening of her lips revealed that her concern was real. Over time I noticed it wasn't just curiosity. There was something new in Evelyn's eyes: shame. Not the shame of someone who is guilty, but of someone who fears the world will discover the truth about someone they love. It was as if she were beginning to realize that protecting Mark could cost her too much. Even so, she tried to maintain her motherly loyalty. She spoke of giving him some time to regroup and not spreading family problems. But the words came out less firm, almost hesitant, as if her certainty were slowly dissolving. In that moment, I understood that no matter how strong the bond of blood, it wouldn't be enough to erase the stain Mark had left. Blood could no longer wash away the shame. We were making progress analyzing the evidence when Sophia received a call that changed the course of the case. On the other end of the line, a man's voice requested a private meeting, claiming to have compromising information about Mark. We met at a discreet coffee shop, far from any connection to our routines. When he arrived, the man seemed restless, looking around as if he feared being followed. He introduced himself as a trusted employee of the company, someone who had participated in restricted meetings for years. In a low voice, he said he had records of direct orders given by Mark to authorize fake contracts and move funds to accounts that didn't belong to the corporation. These were clear instructions, often verbalized in the presence of others. From the folder he carried, he pulled out copies of emails, notes, and even photos of original documents. As Sophia leafed through the material, it seemed to perfectly fill the gaps in the spreadsheets I had found on the flash drive. Each piece reinforced the picture of corruption that was being assembled. The man explained that he could no longer stand to see the company used as a tool for illicit enrichment, and that, despite fearing retaliation, he was willing to testify if necessary. Sophia guaranteed him legal protection and initial confidentiality, but we already knew that, at the right time, his identity would carry weight in court. As we said goodbye, I realized the irony. The most decisive blow against Mark wouldn't come from the outside, but from someone he thought he had under control. Justice had eyes where he couldn't see. I chose a small private cafe, away from the usual prying eyes, to meet with Evelyn. She arrived on time, dressed in impeccable elegance, carrying the same air of superiority that always accompanied her. She ordered tea and made small talk about the weather, unaware that the atmosphere between us had changed. I placed a thin but heavy folder on the table. I began by explaining that, in recent weeks, I had found irrefutable proof that Mark was involved in illegal financial activities. Evelyn's face remained controlled, but the subtle tightening of her fingers as she held her teacup betrayed her discomfort. When I mentioned the joint account she shared with her son, I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. I opened a specific document, bank statements detailing large transfers from that account to Mark's private account. The amounts were high, made in sequence, always on strategic dates. Evelyn's breathing quickened, and the cold glint in her eyes began to fade. She tried to compose herself, claiming it could be a bank error or an old, forgotten authorization. But when I turned the page and showed Mark's recent digital signature authorizing each transaction, her silence became more eloquent than any excuse. In that moment, I realized Evelyn's defenses were crumbling. For the first time, I saw the mask of the unshakable matriarch crack before the naked truth. She tried to deny it, until she saw the proof in her hands. Evelyn remained silent for a few seconds, as if trying to absorb what she was seeing. Then, she took a deep breath and admitted she had noticed strange movements in the account, but had preferred to believe Mark was just reorganizing investments or covering company expenses. Her voice lost its usual firmness and revealed a weariness I had never seen before. "I always defended him," she said, looking away toward the window. "Even when I knew he was wrong, I would find an excuse." The words came out with difficulty, as if each syllable carried the weight of years of denial. The idea that her own son had deceived her so coldly seemed to hurt more than any material loss. I explained that, according to the evidence gathered, the money had been used to support his mistress and finance illicit business dealings. Evelyn pressed her lips together and closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to block out the image. The betrayal wasn't just against me. It was against her, against the family, against any remnant of trust that still existed. The rigidity in her expression transformed into determination. "He will have to answer for this," she stated, more to herself than to me. I knew that decision wouldn't be easy, but I also understood that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Mark had robbed the only person who was still trying to protect him. The day of the testimony arrived with the weight of a family judgment. Evelyn entered the courtroom wearing an impeccable suit, her hair tied back precisely, as always. But her eyes revealed her tension. She didn't look for Mark in the defendant's chair. She walked to the witness stand with firm steps, like someone who knows they can no longer retreat. The judge began the questions and Evelyn answered with clarity. She confirmed that the transfers from the joint account occurred without her authorization, described the amounts, and stated that she had discovered the illicit destination of the money. Her words were measured, but each one hit Mark like a calculated blow. In the seat next to his lawyer, he kept his chin up, but the rigidity in his shoulders betrayed his discomfort. Perhaps he had expected his mother, even in the face of evidence, to find a way to protect him. But in that moment, Evelyn spoke not as a mother, but as a victim. There was no hesitation, no attempt to soften the blow. Evelyn answered each question with the objectivity of someone who understands the weight of the truth. When she finished, she looked at the judge and said, "I can no longer be complicit in something like this." It was the only sentence she spoke without being asked, and it echoed through the room. As she left the stand, Mark remained motionless, as if still trying to process what had happened. But everyone knew. The strongest barrier he had just crumbled. Not even a mother's silence could defend him. On the eve of the final hearing, Mark's lawyer contacted Sophia, requesting an urgent meeting. We met in a private room at the courthouse, away from the bustling corridors. He placed an envelope on the table and, in a tone too polished for the situation, said there was a proposal to end it all. The amount offered was generous, more than I imagined Mark would be willing to part with. As the lawyer explained the terms, I realized the sum came with a clear demand. I had to drop all criminal charges and allow the case to be closed as an amicable agreement. The justification was to avoid unnecessary suffering for all parties. But I knew the real goal was to preserve Mark's public image. Sophia remained silent, observing my reactions. The money would solve my financial problems for many years, but it wouldn't erase the weight of the humiliations, nor would it bring justice for everything he had done. Accepting would mean silencing the truth. I looked at the lawyer and calmly asked if Mark would be willing to publicly admit what he had done. He hesitated, as if the question were dangerous territory, and replied that he didn't believe his client would agree to something like that. It was in that instant that I realized there was room for a counter-proposal. Sophia exchanged a look with me, and we both knew the next step could change the course of everything. The proposal seemed tempting, but it came at a price. Sophia presented the idea directly. I would write a letter detailing all the betrayals, humiliations, and crimes Mark had committed. The agreement would only be finalized if he agreed to read the text aloud, in front of the judge, the press, and everyone present in the courtroom. It would not be just a symbolic gesture, but a public and undeniable record of the truth. I went home that night and at the kitchen table opened a new notebook. The pen felt heavier than usual. I wrote about the soup coupon, the ruby necklace for Lauren, the lies, the secret accounts, the manipulations, and the veiled threats. I relived each scene, feeling the impact of years of silence finding a voice. As the lines multiplied, I realized this wasn't just a letter to expose Mark. It was a document of liberation for me. Each word was a brick removed from the wall that had kept me trapped for so long. When I finished, I read it all aloud alone, letting the sentences echo. There was pain but also strength. The narrative didn't ask for pity. It demanded accountability. It was my testimony, written and censored, with the clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose. I gave the letter to Sophia the next morning. She read it in silence, and when she finished, she looked up and said only, "If he reads this, there will be no coming back for him." Every sentence was a scream silenced for years. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious onlookers, and attentive eyes awaited the decisive moment. The judge, with a stern expression, explained that Mark had one last chance to avoid a sentence. Accept the agreement, and read my letter aloud as stipulated. The envelope with the text rested before him, in the center of the table, like an unavoidable weight. Mark opened the paper slowly, read a few lines, and closed his eyes for a second. The silence in the room was so thick you could hear people holding their breath. The judge encouraged him to proceed, reminding him that this was the only way to avoid immediate prison time. He looked up at me. For an instant I saw not remorse but wounded pride. His hand squeezed the envelope until it crumpled at the edges, and without a word, he handed it back to his lawyer. The refusal was clear. The judge sighed and announced the sentence. Prison. Evelyn, sitting in the back, lowered her face and closed her eyes, as if she wanted to disappear from that moment. Mark remained motionless, but the tension in his jaw revealed the internal struggle not to react in front of everyone. As he was escorted out, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The truth had not been spoken by him, but it was no longer trapped inside me. He chose prison over the truth. I chose the truth over the prison that was our life. When I left the courthouse that day, the sun felt warmer and the air lighter. For the first time in a long time, there was no shadow following me. Mark's sentence didn't erase the scars, but it freed me from the invisible prison I had lived in for years. I walked through the streets like someone rediscovering their own body, breathing deeply, feeling every step. In the following months, I reorganized my life. I traded the house full of memories for a smaller, brighter, and quieter apartment. I painted the walls in colors I had always loved but never dared to choose. I discovered the pleasure of making decisions on my own, without asking for permission or gauging reactions. It was as if, finally, I was in control of my own script. I continued my sessions with Dr. Bishop, no longer to put out fires, but to cultivate my strength. I revived old hobbies, started writing again, playing the piano and taking photographs. Small daily rituals became private celebrations, Coffee in the morning, a walk at sunset, reading before bed. Carla was by my side for every achievement, celebrating as if they were her own. Sophia, even after the case ended, remained a presence, always reminding me that justice is also self-care. Even Evelyn slowly reconnected, perhaps out of regret, perhaps because she recognized that I had survived without losing my dignity. Today I look back and see a woman who walked through fire and came out whole. Not unscathed, but whole. Because to be reborn is not to erase the scars. It's to turn them into living proof that I survived. Now, I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.